Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our Chief Science Advisor, Dr. Yu, and our Seed Oil Survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our uh, monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, a neighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you. Today's going to be a fun discussion. We have a figure who's been really sparking a lot of conversation about what it means to be healthy, what it means to be alive, what it means to have vitality in this modern age, and what the elites have in mind in that regard. And that is, we have the raw egg nationalist with us. How you doing, sir?
It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm really looking forward to talking.
Well, very good. So first off, where'd you get the name raw egg nationalist?
Well, so I've come up on Twitter, and I was on Twitter. I was just sort of lurking around on Twitter, following people like Bronze Age Pervert, who's been a big influence. And There was this hashtag raw egg nationalism, and people were talking about raw eggs, about the power of raw eggs, and health and fitness in general, and how health is something that is actually fundamental to the health of the individual, is something that's actually fundamental to the health of the nation, of the political um, community. And I got behind this raw egg nationalism hashtag. I started knocking back raw eggs myself. I mean, I've got quite a long personal history in health and fitness, in my real life as a non-anonymous Twitter poster. I've been quite well versed in health and fitness, but I got behind this thing, and it was really amazing. Consuming large quantities of raw eggs, it really seemed to take my weightlifting, my sort of bodybuilding training to the next level. So I really got behind it, and I just called myself raw egg nationalist, not really thinking that it would that anything much would come of it. But then something really did. It really sort of started to take off, and I kind of became a figurehead for the movement and a broader sort of fitness movement when I released my cookbook, which was way back in the summer of 2020. I wrote a cookbook, Raw Egg Nationalism, and which contains more than just raw egg recipes, but it does contain some raw egg recipes. It contains cooked egg recipes and all sorts of other stuff, and it's kind of like a political manifesto, if you will, for raw egg nationalism. And it's just been crazy ever since. I've been on Tucker Carlson. I went on Tucker Carlson's show, and I was also in the Tucker Carlson documentary, The End of Men, which generated a huge buzz and a lot of controversy and all sorts of sort of screaming, moaning uh, responses from the mainstream media. So yeah, it's just been a crazy sort of crazy couple of years, really.
To your knowledge, are there any raw egg globalists that you're aware of?
No, I think if anything, they're likely to be plant-based egg globalists or soy globalists. That's what I tend to call the opposite of raw egg nationalism. I've come to call soy globalism. So that's plant-based diets, which are about the worst thing you could eat if you want to live a vital, healthy life. If you want to have high testosterone levels, if you want to be as much of a man as you can be, and yeah, coupled with globalism, with a new, political, the destruction of the nations, and new forms of global government. And in fact, that's my new book, The Eggs Benedict Option, is precisely about how these new plant-based diets intersect with globalist politics. I mean, it's a real thing. It's a very real thing.
And you got someone of the Bin Laden family to write the foreword for your book. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I did. Yeah, I got Noor bin Laden to write the foreword for the book. She's niece of the infamous Osama, but is very surprising in her politics. She's a really powerful fighter against globalism. You may or may not be familiar with her. She came to she really sort of came to popular attention. I think it was, when was it? Was it 2020? Yeah, it was with the 2020 election, and she sort of came out swinging in favor of Donald Trump, which I'm sure surprised a lot of people given her surname and her family background. And yeah, she's great. She knows all about globalism, all about the depopulation agenda, all these kinds of things. And so she wrote a really great foreword to the book about globalism and control of the food supply, which is precisely what the book is about. And we're very good friends, and we talk a lot. And she's interviewed me for her podcast, and she contributes to my magazine, Man's World, which we can talk about in a little while.
So now you like raw eggs. Do you ever cook them, or only raw is what you like?
I cook them. I think eggs are fantastic whichever way you want to have them. I mean, I would, as a general rule, I would say if we're going to cook them, it's better to cook them less rather than more. So
You like them poached?
yeah, poached is good. Soft boiled, that's nice. Scrambled, that's good. I mean, I do eat them raw, but I have fried eggs, of course, with a runny yolk. Eggs are a superfood. That is the main message or one of the main messages I'm trying to get across. So, you know, if you can't bring yourself to consume raw eggs, and some people just won't be able to not to find it disgusting, then eat them cooked instead, because they are a wonderful food.
Are you a bit of a farmer now, or have you gotten into that space?
Yeah, increasingly, yes. I mean, I've been growing produce for a while. I've got a nice garden where I live. I grow fruits. I've got fruit trees and fruit bushes, and I grow vegetables and stuff. I haven't got chickens yet. Funnily enough, I haven't got chickens, and I'm quite jealous of all my followers who now have chickens, and they send me pictures of their chickens and of their eggs that they've produced themselves. But that's something I'm looking to get into in the near future. I'd like to have a small holding. I'd like to have some chickens and some ducks and maybe some pigs, some goats, something like that. I love raw milk. I buy raw milk, but I'd love to have my own raw milk and my own eggs. So yes, I mean that's a long-term dream. And
What are the what are the politics of raw dairy in your neck of the woods over there?
it's legal. It's legal, which
for
is
humans, or you got to say pets?
No, you can buy it for human consumption. You can't sell it in the supermarket, but you can buy it from farms and from producers. So it's not illegal. There is testing though, and I think it's quite stringent, and so it's not particularly hard for raw milk producers to get shut down. But it is at least legal, unlike certain states in the US, and I think in Canada it's even worse. You can't get raw milk anywhere in Canada, and I think that the sort of authorities are constantly raiding farms that they think are selling it. So yeah,
what does
I'm
it
lucky.
usually range price wise? Is it like 3 times the price of conventional store milk, or how does it usually range over there?
To be honest with you, if you can get it from a local farm, it's usually good. It's usually barely more expensive than supermarket milk, to be honest with you, because you're getting it, right from the farm. There are no distribution costs. There's no middleman involved. So yeah, so it's not expensive to drink raw milk over here, not at all.
Oh, that's good. So now, in your dietary philosophy, do you tend to be keto or carnivore or paleo or something else? What do you tend to land on?
I would say that the basic principle, the basic principle animating my approach to diet is that we should eat much more like our ancestors. I'm a big fan of the work of Weston Price. You may be familiar with Weston Price. He was a pioneering dentist in the sort of early 20th century, and he wrote a book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, where he traveled around the world and he looked at tribal societies, traditional societies, and looked for examples of groups of people who were in perfect health. And he found them all over the world, in North America, in Africa, even in parts of Europe, in sort of the Outer Hebrides, that's islands off the coast of Scotland, and in the Swiss Alps. And he basically discovered that in traditional societies where the people display perfect health, what they do is they eat what are called nutrient dense animal foods. So that's things like organ meat, fatty cuts of meat, eggs, animal fat products, blood, shellfish, and things like that. They build their diets around those things. There were variations rather, because there's a lot of difference between a tribe living, like the Masai Mara in Africa living on the Serengeti, and the Inuit living in the sort of harsh, within the Arctic Circle in North America. So there are basic principles that he sort of managed to put together by looking at all of these different diets and seeing what they had in common. And that is basically my approach to dieting, is basically influenced by Western prices, which is that we need to build our diets around nutrient dense animal foods, the kind of foods that traditional societies and that our ancestors prioritized above all else. That doesn't mean that we can't eat carbohydrates. That doesn't mean that we can't eat fruit. That doesn't mean that we can't eat grains. But what it does mean is that the principal building blocks of our diet should be nutrient dense animal foods. And so I wouldn't say I'm keto. I'm not carnivore. I consume raw honey. I eat fruit. I eat seasonal fruits. I eat seasonal vegetables as well. But the mainstay of my diet is sort of nose to tail animal eating. So I make lots of stews with sort of tough cuts of meat like beef shin. I consume a lot of butter, obviously eggs, raw milk, and that kind of stuff. So it's broadly you could say it's paleo. Yeah, I'd say that's maybe the best. That's the best of all of the different sort of dietary groups that you suggested. Paleo is probably the best, because it's about the sort of timeless principles of diet, and I think that there are timeless principles of diet, basically.
Are you familiar with Ray Peat, the late Ray Peat, and the bioenergetic paradigm and how that works?
Yeah, I don't. I know. I've certainly read quite a few of Ray Peat's articles from his website raypeat.com. He's a very interesting figure. I don't know enough about Ray Peat to say whether I truly agree with him. There are some things that I definitely agree with, like his emphasis on avoiding seed oils and polyunsaturated fats. But I'm not so sure that I agree with some of the things that he says about sugar consumption, for instance.
Yeah, he's big on sugar and carbohydrates, and uh, pretty skeptical of a lot of the grains that people eat. But he's big on, I know you mentioned the Bronze Age pervert, and he has a mention of Ray Peat in his work, and the emphasis on the hormones that are affected by the things that we eat. And I do think that the common enemy of all these different camps is the high PUFA products, chicken that's raised with high PUFA, pork that's raised with high PUFA, and then of course, eggs and nuts and seeds that are high PUFA, and then of course the dreaded seed oils. Those are probably driving, in my estimation, 90% of the chronic diseases in the last 100 years. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think seed oils are the real villain. Seed and vegetable oils are the real villain of the nutritional history of the last century or so. Absolutely, I think that's becoming clearer and clearer. And it's been interesting to see this seed or anti-seed oil movement sort of starting to gain legs. Beginning on Twitter and or maybe even not beginning on Twitter, but sort of passing onto Twitter and then sort of getting some kind of mainstream exposure, more mainstream exposure. Now it's being slightly hijacked. Actually, I don't know if do you know about 0 Acre Farms? Have you
Yeah,
been following that?
we've had Jeff, one of the founders of it, on our show. Yeah.
Really? Yeah, I'm a little bit. I'm a bit skeptical about 0 Acre Farms. And but it's interesting nevertheless to see that actually now people are. It's becoming mainstream enough now for there to be startup companies,
Right,
you know, these
right.
food companies that are actually explicitly marketing anti-seed oil products.
I tend to
And
lean towards the traditional time
yeah,
tested fats like tallow and everything being the thing that we
exactly.
should focus on. But when I had him on, I tried to give him, a fair hearing and give him some pretty strong pushback too, and just let folks make their decision about that product. But I
What I think is bad about that, but one of the things that I think is bad about the product is that it's very clearly going to be GMO. And I mean, I looked at the patents that came out for their product, and it says recombinant yeast, and that means obviously a GMO microbe is producing the cultured oil that they're going to sell. And there's a there's a funny kind of sleight of hand that goes on with GMO now, where companies will say that their products aren't GMO if they're made using, let's say, like a GMO bacteria. The product itself they don't call GMO because you're not actually consuming the bacteria, you're consuming a product that the GMO bacteria has produced. But the thing is that, I mean, we know there's a very famous incident that I talk about in the Eggs Benedict Option, my book, called the Showa incident that took place in the late 80s when a supplement company called Showa Japanese company, started manufacturing its tryptophan supplements using a GMO microbe. And the GMO microbe, something went wrong. There was something that some kind of unforeseen consequence, and the GMO microbe also produced a byproduct that was highly toxic. We don't know what it was because there was kind of a cover up about it. But basically, a lot of people got very ill taking this tryptophan supplement that had been made by GMO bacteria, and I think there's a danger even with, even though you're not consuming a GMO, something itself that is actually GMO, the product itself could be different because the thing that's producing it is GMO. And I think that the kind of sleight of hand that they're doing, where they'll say, as they do on their website, if you look on their website, oh, this is a non-GMO product. We use non-GMO sugarcane as feed for the bacteria. They're very, very sort of keen to say that on the website. But what they're not keen to say is that actually the bacteria themselves that are producing it or the yeast fungi that are producing it are GMO. And I don't think that really bodes very well, as far as I'm concerned, for the product.
there's also some debate. We hosted a debate that got some buzz between Tucker Goodrich and Brad Marshall.
Yeah.
One was for, one was against oleic acid, which is the type of monounsaturated fat that that product that you mentioned is mostly made of, and whether eating that in copious amounts, once you've had
Yeah.
especially dysfunction of your mitochondria caused by seed oils, eating copious amounts of oleic acid like that may not be good, even if setting aside the questions raised about the GMO nature of the organism producing the product,
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I'm probably not as up on the positives or negatives of oleic acid as maybe I
Yeah,
should be. It's something that
monounsaturated
I'd
fat.
like
It's
to.
like that redheaded stepchild nobody talks about. It's always like
Yeah,
PUFA, saturated fat, and there's like this
yeah,
big thing in the middle that has all is in beef. It's in so many different tallow, and everything else. But
yeah,
we kind of people don't really know what to do with it. They're kind of like, is it neutral? I think it's good. People tend to lean towards the conventional wisdom in the alternative health world is that it's pretty much innocuous because everybody
mm,
likes olive oil and avocado oil and all these things.
sure.
But there is some concern that perhaps it may not be as healthy in high amounts, especially if your body and mitochondria have been disrupted by, years of
Yeah.
seed oil toxicity.
So
That's
is the 0 acre product presumably then is more or less entirely monounsaturated? Is that what
pretty much what
they're
I
doing?
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, eliminated the
Yes.
PUFA in it and replaced it with a high amount of, like, in mimicking olive oil's
Yes.
consistency.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting because I suppose one of the things that olive oil has that this 0 acre product won't have is polyphenols and
Right.
things like
Yeah.
that, right? And I mean, they play a very, very important part in making olive oil what olive oil is. Uh, Olive oil isn't just the fat; it's also all of these, very, very powerful antioxidant plant compounds.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean that's why, for instance, the polyunsaturated, monounsaturated fats that you get in eggs, it's not the same to consume those as to consume, polyunsaturated, monounsaturated fats in vegetable oil, let's say, because actually what you've got with an egg is you've got all sorts of very, very powerful vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and all sorts of other compounds that actually work against whatever inflammatory properties, let's say, that PUFAs have or MUFAs have. So it's about much more than just the fat content, although the fat content is obviously very, very important. There are other factors at work as well.
It's definitely uh much different when it's in its egg, like an egg form, than the monounsaturated fat than, say, in, or PUFA even, in these vegetable oils. I think the big question for me that I'm continually investigating in my podcasts and programs on seed oil and related PUFA topics is that I think that for me, the jury remains out on whether it is, if sugar has been demonized to the same degree as we know saturated fat and animal products have been in recent media for decades. And it may be that sugar too, because we know there's generally a critique within the anti-seed oil community that maybe we've put too much emphasis on sugar causing the diseases. So they'll say, yeah, it's actually seed oil is causing the disease. But there's a secondary point that I think Ray Peat and his acolytes bring to the table, which I'm still investigating and trying to sort through, which is perhaps, sugars, particularly fruit sugars, and even things like processed sugar, like cane sugar, has been demonized. Even white sugar, table sugar, has been demonized as a villain unfairly by conventional science. To the point where we're missing out on a fundamental aspect of good physical health, which is high amounts of carbohydrates. Now, the problem is most people who have been having their metabolism ruined by decades of seed oil toxicity, they have a hard time processing a high amount of carbohydrates, and it's a difficult thing to try to bring back at the level that a Dr. Ray Peat or somebody might recommend. However, it's an interesting question to continually investigate, because you have to wonder, are we truly carbohydrate burners as our primary fuel, or is it fat as our primary fuel that our body prefers health-wise? And there's some debate there that I think needs further sharpening in the or let's say the honest anti-establishment health community conversation.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I think the notion that humans shouldn't eat any carbohydrates at all is stupid. I mean, I really do, and I think if you look at somebody like Weston Price, if you look at the kind of societies that he described, if you look at the archaeological evidence, like deep archaeological evidence from before the agricultural revolution, then it's very, very clear that our ancestors were eating actually a very, very wide variety of foods. It's obvious that there isn't one single paleo diet, for instance. You couldn't point to one particular set of foods that all people ate at all times, so many thousand years back. I think that the truth is that actually humans are obviously omnivores, and we have always utilized various different food sources, and that obviously includes fruit, that obviously includes tubers, that obviously includes nuts, as well obviously as the fact that it's pretty obvious to me, I think at least, that our ancestors would have prioritized meat and fatty cuts of meat. But there is also abundant evidence that actually humans can survive and thrive in extreme climates and extreme conditions on actually quite limited food sources, a limited variety of food sources. I mean, nobody would look at the Masai Mara, who basically just eat meat, milk, and blood. I mean, those are the three constituent parts of their diet, and say these people are unhealthy. I mean, they're among the tallest people in the world. They have incredibly impressive physiques. You know, they look great. They're obviously a healthy people. So I think there's a kind of reductionism that's often at play in discussions of diet, and I actually think it's unhelpful.
Mhm.
But nonetheless, I do think that we probably now eat too many carbohydrates. That's what I would venture to say. I think that we eat too many carbohydrates, and probably the wrong types, perhaps. I mean, I think there's plenty of evidence now for the ill effects of gluten consumption, for instance. And I think that gluten intolerances have been made worse by new varieties of wheat that have higher gluten concentrations. It's definitely a complicated story. It's definitely a complicated story, and you've got a lot of sort of basically fundamentalists who just want you to believe that there is one way to eat,
Mhm.
and I certainly don't believe that, and I would be the first person to say that that isn't true, that there is just one way to eat.
Your book, the Eggs Benedict option that you mentioned, you talk about how it's a fight, and we're in a contest with folks who want to eat more ancestrally consistent and pro-human. That there's this planetary health diet that folks want us to be on. What in the world is a planetary health diet?
Yeah, so the book is about basically the globalist plan for food. So what our diets might look like if the World Economic Forum, with its welcome to 2030, I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better. If the World Economic Forum and globalists like the World Economic Forum got their way, how would we be eating in the future? And the World Economic Forum has all of these partners, one of which is called various sort of non-governmental organizations. One of them is called the Eat Foundation, and it was founded by these Norwegian billionaires called the Stordalens. And it basically is an activist sort of NGO that is basically pushing for global dietary change in order to save the planet from climate change and feed a global population of 10 billion people a healthy, sustainable diet in 2050. So this organization, the Eat Foundation, commissioned a study with the Lancet, the very, very venerable medical journal, on what a future diet within those parameters might look like. And they came up with this thing called the planetary health diet. And it's a diet that is more or less entirely plant-based and very, very little meat, very few animal products. And it's basically the first ever planetary diet, that everybody on the planet would eat. And this is basically their ambition, and it's being pushed. There are all sorts of studies. You can search the sort of scientific study databases. There are all sorts of studies about how we can implement it and the positive effects it will have and all that kind of stuff. So there's all sorts of maneuvering behind the scenes and also out in the open for the global population to transition to a plant-based diet in order to save the planet. And so I mean, what I try to do in the book is I try to firstly, I tell people actually all about this. I say, this is what's happening and this is what they want. They want people to abandon traditional animal agriculture and start consuming plants, a plant-based diet supplemented with alternative protein sources, maybe some insects, soy, all that kind of stuff, lab-grown meat, maybe. And then I talk about basically the kind of effects that we would expect such a diet to have. So it's also about vegetarian and vegan diets, basically, the book, a lot of it about because we know they're suboptimal diets. We have so much evidence that they're suboptimal diets, and I just say that I talk about how much of a disaster that would be on a global level. You know, it would be a global health catastrophe, I think, really. But it's something that people don't seem to realize is we're actually getting closer and closer towards, you know. I mean, they really are pushing for this. They really want this to happen. And one of the reasons I think that they want this to happen is because what it will lead to is a more or less total corporate capture of the food supply. And this is another theme within the book. Is about the corporate capture of the food supply. The food supply has already been largely captured by corporations. Corporations control the food supply, especially in the US, but elsewhere in the world, to an incredible extent already. But the thing about the transition to a plant-based diet is that a global plant-based diet is that will basically bring that process, make that process total. I mean, in order to feed 10 billion people a plant-based diet, you're going to have to rely on GMO crops. And who owns GMO crops? Corporations. They own the patents for the organisms. They own the seeds. And all of these alternative protein sources that are being pushed now, lab-grown meat, plant-based milk, all this kind of stuff. It's proprietary. It's owned by corporations. So, you know, rather than being able to go to your local farm and buy some ground beef, you're going to have to go to Walmart and buy some Beyond Meat, which is Beyond Meat ground beef, ground plant-based beef, which is owned by a corporation and patented by a corporation. And
Yeah, it's similar.
That's the future that they have in store for us, I think.
Yeah, it's all about patents. That's a great point because it's just like medicine,
Yeah.
we have to fight for public domain nutrition versus this patented, nutrition where,
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it.
Because cows are in the public domain, you can't patent
Yeah.
them so far, and, things like that. Sunlight is in the public domain. I always say if Pfizer could find a way to patent the sun, then the government would be telling us how wonderful it is to get vitamin D, and so
yeah, I mean that's what I think about. That's one of my main criticisms of zero acre farms is that,
right.
If they identify the problem, right? They've got the problem right. Yes, it's seed and vegetables. We need to stop eating this toxic crap. But the answer is not, oh, actually, what we need GMO bacteria to produce a new kind of oil that we've never eaten before. Oh, and that GMO bacteria will be totally proprietary and, will be owned by a corporation that will make huge amounts of money from it. The answer, surely, is that we just need to go back to eating the fats we used to eat before. Butter, tallow, lard.
What about their argument, though, that, if you scaled up, everybody was doing, our friend of the show, Joel Salatin, who comes on a lot with me, if everybody was doing regenerative agriculture like Joel Salatin and John Moody and the rogue food farmers and so forth, if everybody was scaling it up to the maximum capacity of American land and everybody else, that we wouldn't have enough, supply of butter, beef tallow, pork fat, most of the pork fat's garbage, but assuming it could be scaled up into a saturated fat level like my friend Brad Marshall's doing with his Firebrand Meats experiment, that still, even with coconut oil and so forth, you still wouldn't be able to, in olive oil, you still wouldn't be able to supply the world's population on these healthy natural fats. So that's why we have to create a synthetic new type of fat. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, this one of the things I say in the book is, why do we care about feeding the entire world? I mean, why is that our problem? Precisely.
Yeah, I mean, so I see what you're saying. I'm just saying, like, in terms of if the whole world, if what we are saying
Oh,
is
sure.
true,
Yeah.
can the
Yeah.
whole world actually adopt what we're saying? You know, when you have populations as big as China and India, could they actually? Their argument, and I don't know if it's correct, but their argument is like these populations exploded to the level they are precisely because of these industrial seed oil
Yeah.
products that are so dirt
Well,
cheap that you can stuff it into them and give everybody, cheap nutrition trash, and then they're able to
sure.
breed, and then therefore you have a huge
Yeah.
population. So
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I'm certainly I'm certainly no enemy of population retrenchment. Like if it is the case that you know these particular sort of corporate foodstuffs, these trash foods are supporting a surplus population, then I mean maybe if we got rid of them, it might actually do the world good, and maybe we could gradually sort of return to more sustainable
now that,
levels of
but
population.
now you're sounding like the neo Malthusians there, though, that want to have a depopulation, right? So
Well, no, I don't. I mean, I don't mean it in terms of like a sort of deliberate depopulation. But what I mean is that I think that say population increase in Africa is definitely unsustainable, and you know whatever problems we have now with an African population of 1 billion, it's going to be far worse if there are 5 billion. You know, as the sort of as the population projections suggest. And look, I mean, something like the war in Ukraine, for instance, has uh, thrown into the starkest relief just how dependent some African nations are on Russian and Ukrainian grain, for instance. Like there are, I don't know how many. I think every nation in Africa is at least sort of something like 50% dependent on Ukrainian and Russian grain for their imports, and then you've got nations like Somalia and Ethiopia and East African nations that are 100% dependent on cheap grain exports from Russia and Ukraine. I think there are huge problems with the global food system. I mean, I think that the way that corn is produced in the US, for instance, I've written about this recently for American Greatness, and I talk about it in the book. I think that the way that corn is produced is a huge problem, not just for America itself, but also for the rest of the world. And
David Lynch, the director, says that America is possessed by a Mesoamerican corn god.
yeah, I've heard that. I don't think he's far off the I don't think he's far off the truth, to be honest with you. I mean, the corn subsidy system and the way that corn is produced in the US is crazy. And a book, I think that everybody, certainly anybody looking to get red pilled about nutrition and about the way that food is produced, should read The Omnivore's Dilemma, Michael Pollan's classic book, which I think is a very, very quietly radical book, actually, far more radical than people might assume. I mean, he leaves it up to the reader really to draw the conclusions about maybe what ought to be done about corn and about the food system in the US. But by laying bare the nature of the system, then he really makes it clear just how insane the priorities of food production in the US are. Um, but I mean, I just think that this argument about the global food supply, about having to feed everybody is, I think that it is just a smokescreen basically for increasing corporate control.
But I think, yeah. I mean, you're saying from a perspective of being a busybody, where we take on this kind of colonial mindset of how shall we feed the world? It is our job to feed the world. That kind of arrogance, yeah, is hubristic. But I do think that there's another way to look at it, where I believe that, you know, embracing regenerative agriculture and true proper nutrition for animals that we would then harvest the fat from, uh, even chicken fat and these other animals. Like, I think that there's a way to actually scale
Yeah,
radical,
I do. I do.
centralized, local access to fats, right? That and another one that they don't, another one that they hate a lot, which is not a seed oil, but it gets lumped in with vegetable oil in the category, at least in America, nutrition table guidelines, is palm oil, and everybody it gets they're scared of that because of the the narrative about it being bad for the environment and the way they process. But
Yeah.
palm oil is a very ubiquitous fat that, again, it's politically incorrect to say you should support it, but it's a ubiquitous global fat that is relatively saturated compared to even olive oil. And
Yeah.
if there's a way to do that in a little bit better way for conservation, that'd be awesome. But this idea of like, if you include palm oil in the conversation, plus coconut oil, plus olive oil, plus good healthy lard and tallow and butter and even other stranger saturated fats that are local to certain areas, like shea butter is a saturated fat.
Yeah.
Even cocoa butter. I mean, if you put all the natural sources on deck, I think we could actually provide really nutritious, healthy fats for the whole world and not have to worry about any kind of mass die off or something because we've gotten rid of seed oils out of the system.
Yeah. No, I do. Well, I
And
think
also,
that
by the
there
way,
are.
when you just to further point, when you reduce seed oils, okay, seed oils are what stimulate the endocannabinoid system in your body, which makes you have those
Yes.
munchies to anyway. So you're going to eat less probably of a bunch of junk, empty calorie foods, anyways.
Yeah.
When you get those out of the body.
Precisely. I mean, I think that there are all sorts of problems. I mean, there are problems with food waste, for instance. Maybe we could try to do something about food waste, and that's
Yeah,
something I talk about a little bit in the Eggs Benedict option. And that's one small thing that the planetary health diet actually has in its favor, or at least they talk about how awful food waste is. And food waste is awful. I mean, it's terrible, but I mean, in large part, that's because so much crap food is being made. I mean, they're just pumping out so much crap food that just goes to waste. So there are various different ways to attack the problem, I think, and I also think that it's difficult. It's difficult to model it. Like you hear these models, like the planetary health diet. Oh yes, we can feed 10 billion people if we just utilize X amount of land in this way. It's actually, I think that what you actually have to do is you have to look at actual attempts to, like what somebody like Joel Salatin is doing. I mean, he has demonstrated with his 200 odd, is it 200 or 500 acre farm?
he has
You know,
altogether it's a couple thousand with the lease land he has, but yeah,
oh,
about
okay,
500
yeah,
is the core farm, I believe.
yeah. So it's not, this is not a huge industrial farm. This is
Right.
in relative terms, a small farm.
Yeah.
It's incredibly productive, and the
Because it's
model,
a more effective use of the land closer to nature
yeah,
where you're stacking different
yeah,
organisms on top of one another and
yeah,
on top of one another, but in a way that rotates and everybody
yes,
is taken care
yeah,
of and it's
yeah.
wonderful.
Well, I mean, one of the main influences in my book, The Eggs Benedict Option, when I talk about the Eggs Benedict Option, which is my alternative vision of a future of agriculture, I talk about Russian household gardening, which is something that people in the permaculture community are familiar with and know about, but actually hasn't really had a lot of exposure, uh, a wider exposure than that. And it's this basically Russians produce a lot of their own food, a significant amount of their own food, in fact, in small gardens out in the countryside. And this includes city dwellers. So, Russia is now an urban country, and yet millions of people travel out to the cities to gardens where they grow stuff and they use permaculture principles, the kind of stuff that Joel Salatin does, but on an even smaller scale, on like a half an acre plot. And they produce huge amounts of high quality organic food. They don't use pesticides and herbicides. They don't use chemical inputs. They use compost and manure, and they use techniques like cover cropping and all sorts of stuff like that. And they actually produce a significant amount of the food that they eat. I mean, there's a PhD thesis on the topic of Russian household gardening that I drew very heavily upon for the book, and it contains these amazing statistics. Like 3% of all the land under cultivation in Russia in, I think it was 2005, produced 50% of Russia's total agricultural output by value. I mean, that's crazy. It's crazy. Like, don't tell me that small scale agriculture can't work. I mean,
Right.
Russia is, for all its problems and faults, Russia is a modern industrial nation of 150 million people, and 50% of its agricultural output by value 10, 15 years ago was produced by ordinary people on 3% of the land. I mean, and that's less land than is taken up by lawns in the US. So, like,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, what a waste to have all that. I mean, have you ever looked into? I'm sure with your focus, you've probably have. Have you ever looked into the rise of grass as as this ground cover that had to be this mimetic fashion that became what it is today?
yeah, I mean, I know a little bit about the
Yeah.
sort of the origins of the well-kept lawn
Yeah.
in England. You know, where if you're a lord of the manor, and what you're demonstrating is basically that you've got enough sheep to keep the grass nicely short. And yeah, I mean, it's started off really as a demonstration of power and
I
economic power.
I mean, I think the way to break the back of this pathetic pharmaceutical cartel based system, which basically you have to do, I think, if you're going to beat the corrupt food system that's layered on top with that, is you've got to get patents out of medicine. You've got to put public health, health and health solutions in the public domain. We're refuse because I think patents are a hindrance for people to be able to have an even playing field, so that when a new
Yes.
disease arises, there's not this bias towards things that are patented, right, rather than things that are in the public domain
Yeah.
that have
Well, that's
the ability to be just as accessible for people to use for solving a health problem. What do you think about the need for a disruptive approach to energy if we're going to beat this oligarchic system that you're describing in your book? Um, we recently had Oliver Stone on to talk about his new book, his new movie, Nuclear Now, where he makes the case for traditional nuclear fission being something that has been unfairly disparaged by energy oligarchs in the same way food oligarchs are trying to disparage, these animal foods like you talk about. Shouldn't energy be just as essential for reclaiming our liberty against these globalists, when you could say, look, you're not going to pigeonhole us into this false dialectic between, oil, which is run by oligarchs with all their foreign interests, versus, these fake green solutions like solar and wind that don't scale in a way that's affordable for the average person to take on without massive redistribution of wealth from the public to these oligarchs. And so therefore we're not choosing this. We want something that's going to be more of an abundant source of energy, and that leads us to the direction of nuclear or other things that are going to be outside of the ability to create that kind of artificial scarcity of energy access that seems to be the name of the game.
Yeah, I mean, no, I that sounds very, very interesting. I didn't know Oliver Stone was doing that. I will have to. Is that film out yet, or is it
Yes,
coming
at
out?
least in the U.S. I don't know what it is.
Okay, well, I'll see if I can. I'll see if I can find it. But yeah, I mean, that's an argument that I yeah, can definitely get behind. I do think that with nuclear you can't, and especially if we can come up with new fusion technology using things like hydrogen and water or whatever to produce nuclear energy, then yeah, I mean, there's no question then of artificial scarcity at all, is there? And that
That changes
obviously
the
then creates,
equation in terms of
yeah,
our relationship with these folks that say, see, I think we need to double down on progress. These people say, oh, we're the ones that'll solve the planet's problems. Well, I don't buy
yeah,
into their hysteria, but I do think
no,
those who love freedom should say, okay, let's have that debate. Let's have that
mm,
technological debate. We'll get our technology out there in a decentralized way, better and more efficiently and effectively than you can get your stupid fake version like solar and wind, which I'm not denying that there's something charming about that, but it doesn't scale to any way that is a reliable energy. It's very primitive in its intermittent status and so forth.
yeah,
So we're just not going to waste our time with such stupid fake green. They always have fake versions of the good thing, like fake healthcare. We all want to be taking care
mm,
of our health. But those things make us sicker when we use their fake healthcare. And then they say, well, we've got green solutions for pollution. And say, no, actually, your stuff is garbage. It doesn't actually scale in a way that makes energy too cheap to meter, which is what we should aim for. So, these are things that we double down and beat them at the claims that they're making. We outcompete them on their visions, not reacting and saying, oh, you like the big vision stuff. Well, we can't do anything. We're just going to rebel and react. That makes you fixated on them as your idol. Even if you're in rebellion to them, you're still owned by their thought process and just reacting to it. We can't react. We have to beat them into the future.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It's interesting how nuclear has been taken off the table. I mean,
Right.
it was a terrible. I mean, the thing that happened, at Fukushima, that was terrible. It was terrible for a number of reasons, obviously, because people died and it contaminated the environment, but also it helped, I think, to discredit nuclear at a crucial time when actually, as you say, and as I think, then yes, we should be moving towards nuclear again. And I mean, there's been so little investment in nuclear for decades now. I mean, in this, in Britain, for instance, we were pioneers of nuclear technology. We were pioneers of not only of nuclear weapons technology during the Second World War, but also nuclear energy technology. And now, actually, we have to rely on on foreign companies, on French companies, for instance, like EDF, um, to produce new nuclear reactors in this country because we've lost the ability to do it ourselves. And yeah, it's a bad thing. I mean, it's something that takes. There are obviously huge sunken costs and things like that, and it takes a long time to get nuclear power plants up and running, and we just haven't been doing it, and we just don't have the infrastructure to do it because people are scared. I think there's a lot of scaremongering about the safety of nuclear, and obviously nobody wants to have a nuclear power plant built near their home or anything like that. But actually, the thing about nuclear power is that actually you don't need to build that many of them. Yeah, I think it's I do think, as you say, that we are probably forced into a false dichotomy, if you will, between yes, a kind of reactive stance when actually it's not.
I mean, it's just like
There are other options.
the whole argument of like, oh, if you want to help the little critters and the animals, you have to be vegan. But it's like you guys slaughter more animals for your monocrop based seed oil,
Yeah,
disgusting, toxic trash food. Even if before you get to the seed oil part, which is these
yeah,
massive factories polluting and displacing nature and all the woodland creatures. But when you get into just like a monocrop of broccoli, something innocuous that most people aren't going to hit on too hard. But that's a lot of animals, there's a lot of voles, a lot of if we're talking about
mm,
British literature, this is everybody in the Wind and the Willows is getting murdered for vegan diets. Okay, let's be real
yeah,
about this. Uh, badgers, foxes, voles, moles, every kind of little beautiful deer slaughtered, owls murdered. And I think there should be a documentary. Maybe you and I will put it together where we film
yeah,
with your British accent and watch how many animals are murdered, and you just speak about
yeah,
the plight of these little voles and these foxes and all these little animals from Redwall all being murdered viciously for the sick globalist vegan based diet that is needed in order to have around the clock access to every kind of vegetable and fruit that makes up these Instagram diets. I think that'd be a
yeah.
great illuminating experience.
Well, it's the same with so-called renewable energy technology, isn't it? I
Yeah.
mean, look at the terrible
Mm-hmm.
environmental cost of mining lithium, for
Mm-hmm.
instance. I mean, and what we're going to replace all internal combustion cars with uh, electric cars with lithium batteries. We're going to phase out fossil fuels and have solar panels, and they will be charging giant lithium batteries. I mean, nobody even seems. The funny thing is, nobody even seems to be aware of the environmental costs, or at least they're not enlightened about the environmental costs of doing all of that. They're never spoken about. It's just like, oh yes, we can just build some solar panels and then we'll have free electricity forever. And it's like it doesn't work like that. Nothing works like that. In the same way that you can't just grow plants and feed the world without also causing some harm, actually quite significant harm to other kinds of animals. Yes, you're not slaughtering pigs and cattle, but you're slaughtering, as you say, voles and owls and small mammals, and at the lower end of the food chain.
Salamanders, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Sick. And it's we just need to film their faces as they're being murdered by these
mm,
horrific sick vegans. And God
yeah,
bless them. They know not what they do, and they just need to see and then repent and turn back to an ancestral diet. Because again, if you're getting your food, I mean, I was just with Joel Salatin for the weekend, and it's like when you're over there and you see, wait, how many animals have to die to feed my family? Two cows, maybe? I mean, one cow, probably. I don't know how big your family is, but I mean,
Yeah,
this is something. One cow could feed multiple families actually if you do the cut shares and everything for many,
yeah,
many months. And so you don't have to, have a little bit of dairy, have a little bit of beef, have a little bit
mm,
of orange juice, if you're in Florida, and have a good time. And that's actually less animals being slaughtered than
yeah,
the sick monocrop based vegan, eating copious amounts. And then the vegans also talk about, the methane that the cows produce. I think that's a scapegoat for the methane that vegans produce with the kind of beans
yes,
that they're eating, the level of beans. It's
yeah,
going to be driving methane production through the roof, and there's no stopping that when they get further and further entrenched down that path. Especially with the toxic seed oils. I mean, the things that's going to do to the gut is apocalyptic. Um, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. What's the strangest thing that you've encountered in your research on these different areas of the global planet health, or anything related to your magazine that you've just been taken aback by how bizarre it was?
oh God, oh, here's a bizarre thing. So I've been doing some reporting for the National Pulse, which is a news website run by Raheem Kassam, and I've been digging into lab grown meat and one company in particular. So I rag on this guy called Josh Tetrick all the time. He's the CEO of Just Inc. And I started ragging on him because he has this company called Just Egg, which makes plant-based eggs, and it's just ridiculous. I mean, it's mung bean protein
Ugh.
and canola oil. It's disgusting. Like it's the absolute opposite of an egg. It's an abomination. It's a
It should be
joke.
called Just Rapeseed. That would be an honest
Yeah,
product. Just
exactly.
Rapeseed. There you go. That's the new
Yeah, just
label.
just rape. And it's so I started ragging on him about that. And anyway, I found out he's got another company called Good Meat, which produces lab grown meat. And I've been looking into this lab grown meat. It's just received FDA approval in the US for sale to the public. And so they're getting ready now to sell it to the public. And I have been digging into it, and I looked at their FDA filings, and I discovered that the company that makes this lab grown meat for Good Meat, so it's another company that makes it, is this Chinese company called Join Biologics, which is involved in the breeding of lab animals
Mm.
and is very closely linked to the Chinese government's bioweapons program, the Chinese military bioweapons program. So there's all of these bizarre, really shady links between this new lab grown meat and not only the breeding of lab animals for torture. So, hey, that's a really ethical thing, right? Lab grown meat, an ethical food of the future made by a company that breeds lab animals for experimentation, but also is then linked to the Chinese military's bioweapon program, which is also extremely worrying. So, I found that pretty strange. And that's my latest piece for the National Pulse, which I've posted on my Twitter, and maybe I'll post again. All of which is to say that there are some very, very strange connections between these new foods and certain companies and governments, and there's a whole agenda, and it's very, very shady, and I feel it's my duty to get as close to the bottom of it as I can, and so that's what I'm trying to do.
What success look like to you?
Success would be, what would it be? It would be the emergence of an actual political movement that places the health of the individual at the center of national health. And RFK Jr., I mean, I don't know what I think of RFK Jr. yet, but he has at least made the health of the nation, the health of the American nation, one of his main priorities, and he sees more than any other mainstream political figure that you can't have a healthy nation if you don't have healthy individuals and healthy communities. And he talks a lot about he talks a lot about the big pharma companies, as quite rightly, but he also talks about the food supply as well. And I think that the only way that we're ever going to really to make any meaningful change when it comes to food and medicine and people's health is with a determined political movement. And maybe he's the beginning of that, maybe not, but it's definitely what we need, I think.
Well, Raw Egg Nationalist, thanks for joining us. And I want folks to know more about where they can link up with your content. Give us a little shout out, please.
Yep. So I'm on Twitter, Raw Egg Nationalist. My handle's babygravy9. I have a website, rawegnationalist.com, and I also have a magazine. That's mansworldmag.online. So if you go to any of those places, you'll be able to find my articles and my work. My books are on Amazon, including the Eggs Benedict option, which is available in paperback.
Very good. Thanks for your time.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.